Hi guys, Andre here, and welcome to Pepper's Echo. There's a whole lot of things we look at from the average man in the street, looking at a few things that are happening in South Africa. Once again, as I said, it's a layman's point of view, and just your average man looking at what's happening. If you want to get more detail on what we're looking at and what we're talking about, I strongly suggest you get yourself over to one or two of the big guns, Ronaldo Gous and Chris Wyatt. They have intensely covered these subjects and that as well. On the live echo, the DNA discussion, we did speak on the 5th of October on the farm murder, looking at the Brendan Horner farm murder as well. But we did not specifically. I think it has been almost torn apart and analyzed top to bottom. What has distressed me, however, is the letter from our president. A very sort of sweep under the carpet letter. And I'd like to basically maybe share some views with you on that this evening, if I can. And take a look at is a letter from our dear President Cyril, which I'm not very, very impressed with. It's on Monday, the 12th of October. And his letter from the desk of the president. Dear fellow South African, did we expect any other address? Just over a week ago, Brendan Horner, a young farm manager in the Free State, was murdered in an appalling act of cruelty. Mr. President, I agree with you on that. It was an absolute savage act of violence. His killing should anger and upset every one of us. You are correct in saying that. No matter who we are, no matter what community we live in, no matter our race, creed, or language, we should be as deeply affected by the death of Brendan Horner as we are by the many other South Africans who die of violent deaths each year. Are you downplaying Brendan's death? Yes, you should be upset about it. Why are you only voicing your opinion now when people have got up and said enough is enough? Now, all of a sudden, we want to scrape together all the Lego blocks. Mr. President, no death is an acceptable death, especially if it was violent, especially if it was an act of savagery, and if it has caused any form of trauma. But this death of this young 21-year-old farm manager is the straw that broke the camel's back. These violent, savage, traumatic deaths are absolutely getting out of hand on our farms. It doesn't help putting red herrings in when you're addressing something like this. And it's got to the point where your hand was forced. You have been silent. Just as we mourn the loss of his life, we also mourn the deaths of Muhammad Tuta, Tauquia Aesop, and Andre Bennett, the three young men who were shot in a car in Delft in the Western Cape in the same week. I'm not going to downplay those three gentlemen's death. It was murder, as was the police officer that was murdered. What is making Brendan Horner's death stand out is the barbaric, savage torture that he has gone through, that is consistently gone through by farmer after farmer after family after family, specifically on our farms. This is what is being addressed. It is a certain cause. It is not eliminating the disastrous, traumatic, unacceptable deaths around this country, or around South Africa. But it is highlighting a cause of farm attacks and savage murders. You are avoiding the subject, Mr. President. Our thoughts are with the families at this time of grief. It is such moments that we are called on to reach to each other as South Africans, to show compassion, empathy, and solidarity. I question solidarity again when a week or two ago, Mr. President, you were the one who stated that we have not dealt with unequal racial statuses, if I can try and loosely get around what you said. You are the one who is creating the divide. How can South Africa reach out to each other in solidarity when our leading party is dividing them? Mr. President, you are contradicting yourself. Please, may this be a lesson to you that you cannot split a country and wonder why these traumatic, tragic events are occurring when you're turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to them. These crimes are stark reminders of the levels of violence in our country. Why do we have these levels of violence in our country? Possibly because the ANC, the ruling government, is turning a blind eye, is inciting them, is encouraging them. Just a question. I know this letter was written with some form of intent, but it's a bittersweet. While crime affects everyone, very correct, the majority of victims of violent crime are black and poor, and it is young black men and women who are at the disproportionately greater risk of being murdered. Mr. President, I have no doubt that there's possibly, well, not possibly, that there is a higher percentage of black people that are murdered. Take a look at our demographic in this country. There is a higher percentage population of black people in this country. Anything that occurs in this country is going to affect a black person more than what it affects a white person. Contrast will be the same. I will take as much damage to a white demographic as to a black demographic. But I do not, see the need to put color into your letter. What are you trying to say? That we mustn't forget that there's more black people dying than white people? Or that we should not forget that there are people dying in this country? That would be your message more. Demographically, if a meteor hit this country, more black people will die than white people. Why? Because there is about 80%, 85% of this country is black, of South Africa. It's a fact. It still doesn't excuse the tragedy. It still doesn't excuse how and why it occurs. Your reason for putting that in is uncalled for, Mr. President. You yourself now are creating a racial divide by trying to point out something that isn't there. People are being murdered. Violence in South Africa is an everyday occurrence. The reason you have been driven to this letter isn't the everyday occurrence of violence in this country. To that, the ANC has been silent. The reason you were driven to this letter is because of a farming community that stood up for a cause. Now, if your cause is save the polar bears, and you stood up for that, you would be making a statement on saving the polar bears. If your cause is save the penguins on Robben Island, but the cause here is stop the savagery, the torture, the slaughter of farmers. Nowhere has someone given it a color. Mr. President, however you choose to give murder a color in this country. We have a huge risk to bring an end to murder, assault, robbery, rape, and violence against women and children wherever it happens and whoever it affects. It requires that all peace-loving South Africans stand together, not only to condemn these criminal acts, but also to work together to end them. I find that both these paragraphs contradict each other, where you try and split people by saying that violent crimes are for more on a poor black person, and then you say peace-loving South Africans need to stand together. You're splitting. I agree with your second paragraph, 100%, yes. We need to stand together, not only to condemn the acts, but to bring us together. But how can South Africa come together when our ruling party is splitting us apart? When our ruling party has no interest in building the country? Just a question, and I know I'm going off your letter at the moment, and I'm sorry, but I'm just looking at the contradictions that you're putting in. It requires that we hold fast the principles contained in our Constitution, that we uphold the rule of law, and that we strengthen our justice system to ensure that the perpetrators are brought to book. Once again, the first accountability is in our governing party. The second accountability, Mr. President, is our justice system is broken. Something that was unnecessary placed here, and I'm going to show you a few pictures on this, ladies and gents. The violent protests that took place in Senegal following the arrest of suspects in Brendan Horder's murder show that we have not yet escaped the divisions and the mistrust of our past. Mr. President, once again, you are splitting the country, dividing it for us, and bringing the past in. How long are you going to drag a dead horse? How long are you going to flog a dead horse? How long is it going to be before you accept accountability for what is happening in this country? How long are you going to ride the wave, even though it's left to a puddle of the past? Your pathetic attempt at abdicating is absolutely disgusting. It's spineless. And once again, you go to divide by pointing out that we have not escaped the division and the mistrust of our past. It's current. It's not past. It's current. While anger at the senseless killing is justifiable, of course it's justifiable, vigilantism is not. No one has tried to be a vigilante. The country has begged and has pleaded. Communities have begged and pleaded that you take action. Except in 2018, you denied the problem. Now you're wanting to generalize it. It is a point of problem. I'm not denying that there are murders all over the country. But this community of farmers are dying at a rate of war. Senseless killing, justifiable vigilantism. Let's take a look at this violent protest. Yeah, there we go. That's a violent, hang on. Those are protests that you did not put a letter out to, that you did not express your shock to, that you did not suddenly try and comb over the country, that you did not address as needing to stand together against, that you did not address as past. It looks pretty violent to me, yeah. And that is in South Africa. That is violent protests. Let's take a look at the violent cynical protest. I don't condone throwing that car over. But Mr. President, when your party, when your governing ANC party has set the bar at actually breaking and damaging, then that is a minor. Yes, it was set alight, and it's even come to light that possibly it wasn't the farmers. I'm not saying, because it's an allegement and it's a presumption. But when you have set the standard in your country that things need to be destroyed to protest, and one pickup, one vehicle is turned over, and yeah, set alight, I do, and I do not condone it. I do not condone it. But your shock and horror at that, and your abstinence of that, makes me query your integrity. Violence. Let's take a look at the rest of the violent protest. They are violently on their knees praying. More violent praying. In a group. How violent is that? Violent protests. Mainstream media is run by South African government. Because that's a sensation. That's once again the division you are causing. Let's take a look at this violence that you're talking about. Violent. No, Mr. President. I am sadly disappointed. The violent protests that took place in Senegal, you were inciting tension between people there. Show that we have not escaped the division and the mistrust of our past. Your abdication of your responsibility and implementing division in your own country is a sign of spinelessness and weakness. If we are to succeed in tackling the violent crime, particularly in our rural area communities, we must confront this trauma and challenge the racial attitudes that prevent a united response. Mr. President, you yourself have just shown a racial attitude in the first few paragraphs of this letter. Let's take a look. It's maybe not racial, but I mean, you're condemning us, and I don't know if it's now or further on in the letter, that we assume, it's assumed, I think it's in the letter somewhere. There we go, my apologies. The brutal killing of a young white farmer. Yeah, vigilantes. The brutal killing of a young white farmer, allegedly by black men, followed by the spectacle of white farmers storming a police station to get a black suspect, has opened up wounds that go back to many generations. Once again, Mr. President, you contradict yourself. First of all, you're bringing race into it. But while you are bringing race into it, you first say alleged black men. And if I can show you, it does say on the 3rd of October 2020, police arrested 2 suspects, Sekwetia Isaiah Mhlamba and Sekola Pit Matletsa, at Fangtseng Nchu, a township outside Paul. Their clothes and shoes were bloodstained and have been sent for forensic tests. Okay. So maybe it's not them, but why are you saying alleged? Because They are black. Okay, whether we like it or not, whether it's a fact. You yourself will say suspects, black suspects. You've then once again racially divided everybody. Instead of saying the brutal killing of a young white farmer, followed by the spectacle of farmers storming a police station to get the suspect has opened wounds to go back many generations. Why are you doing that again? Why are you refusing to accept responsibility for actions in your country that you have created a precedent and standing on? You are creating so much divide in this letter. It is actually quite sickening. Once again, you are going back. You are mentioning you're going black and you're going white and you're going back many generations. The generation is current. The government is the ANC. The weakness and the rot in this country is you and your party. This is a racially motivated letter. I'm sorry, Mr. President, as much as what you've tried to candy stripe it. If we are to succeed in tackling violent crime, particularly in rural communities, we must confront this trauma and challenge the racial attitudes that prevent a united response. Racial attitudes. Let's take a look. EFF calls for arrest of farmers responsible for cynical violence. Let's take a look at racial attitudes. I don't know if you guys can read this. EFF have condemned the incident as a demonstration of South Africa's preferential treatment of white people, especially in the context of violent protest. This is the EFF, ladies and gentlemen. They have called for the arrest of each and every white person. This is the EFF. This is really, really rich. Coming from the EFF, by the way. Involved in today's violence and an investigation into the passive response of officers. The EFF wants everybody in this violent, let's just go back, this violent protest, ladies and gentlemen. We should lock them up in churches. They pray too much. Julius Malema slighted the chaotic scenes that unfolded. The individuals arrogant as a result of this ANC-led government, which suffers from a low self-esteem and a fear of whiteness, committed these violent acts, knowing very well no force would be shown against them because of the color of their skins, they said. EFF, guys, white people can act with impunity. Unlike the countless times where we have seen law enforcement use force against black people who protest peacefully for genuine issues, the white men who terrorized police outside a court of law operated with impunity. Now, Mr. President, you are allowing racism, racist statements from a known savage. And I say savage because if you take a look at how the EFF carries on, which I'm about to show you as well, and their actions, to be calling for this and to be making these kind of statements. I'm not going to carry on with this one. It's in the South African EFF calls for arrest of farmers, if anyone needs to see that. Let's take a look. Number 4, let's take a look at the EFF. This is their peaceful protests. Let's go back one. Unlike the countless times where we've seen law enforcement use force against black people who protest peacefully for genuine issues. Peaceful protests. I assume they got together to have a barbecue at that protest. They have not challenged law enforcement. They have fought law enforcement. They are lawless. They are destructive, the EFF. There it is. Violence implied and implicated, the EFF. That is just lately. That is click stores being trashed by the EFF. And so it starts. Click store Witbank petrol bombed. That is by the EFF. That's violent, people. That's violence. Unlike the countless times where we have seen law enforcement use force, which I did not see in any of those protests, against black people who protest peacefully for genuine issues. Peacefully for genuine issues. He wants the arrest of each and every white person involved in today's violence that's at the Senegal court and investigated, while him and his cronies go on a rampage. Mr. President, if we are to succeed in tackling violent crime, particularly in rural communities, we must confront this trauma and challenge the racial attitudes that prevent a united response. Then I seriously suggest that you, starting with looking at this letter, which is so racially contradicting and dividing, and then your abstinence from taking action against somebody like Julius Malema and the EFF and allowing them to incite these racist statements, racist actions, and then continue with violent protests and then point a finger. Mr. President, I seriously think that you are far too light, spineless, and you are turning far too many blind eyes and deaf ears. But let us continue with your letter. Those people who think that farm attacks affect just a small part of our population are wrong. You are correct in that, Mr. President. The farming community is an integral part of our economy. Very right so, rightly so. The farming community produces the food that we eat. A violent crime on farms poses not just a threat to the safety of our rural communities, but to our nation's food security. Of course. And if I'm not mistaken, and once again alleged, Julius Malema had suddenly decided he wasn't going to be eating food from farms. He thought it came in from China or somewhere like that. But anyway, that is, I don't know if it's a hearsay or what, I cannot prove that. But yeah, I do not pass his intelligence of saying something like that. The claim that violent crime on farms is part of an orchestrated campaign by blacks to drive white farmers off their land is simply not borne out by fact. Mr. President, if you're dealing with the subject, why are you once again inciting black and white? The request is to stop farm murders, farm massacres. Numerous studies show that crime in farming communities is largely opportunistic. Rural communities are more vulnerable because of their isolated location, and as a result, the relative lack of access and security and other services. It is a soft target. I agree. Why are we not doing anything about it is the question. While you're corrupting yourself, let me not get a little bit worse with it, feeding your fat faces. Contrary to their responsible claims of some lobby groups, killing on farms are not ethnic cleansing. They are not genocide. They're acts of criminality and must be treated as such. Does the motivation matter when you need to stop it? You're groveling for reason. The success of our rural safety strategy rests on greater coordination and better communication between the South African Police Service, business, farming organizations, and communities, which I do believe the communities and the farming communities and the farmers and that have been trying to do. You are not enabling your security forces and your security services. The commandos you took apart, they were a great asset to farm protections. But you're afraid that they will prevent you letting your cronies loose on violent protests. So you disband them. Now you are trying to justify farm murders. There needs to be more collaboration between farm watch organizations and community policing forums. Farming communities, including farm workers, must actively participate in these forums because it is they who are the eyes and ears of the ground. Traditional leaders need to be empowered to play a greater role in the safety of the farming communities. Mr. President, do you not think that this is what the farming communities are trying to do? They are trying to do their very best. We need government intervention in this. Why do you think groups of people protest to the union buildings? Mr. President, if you'd actually lift your arse and actually take a look at a Pepazeko now and again, you will find that the list of farmers who are killed, who are murdered, who are tortured, who are gutted, who are beaten, bludgeoned, pangered, macheted to death, don't only fall under the white farming community. Black, Indian, white, colored. But while you are talking about percentages, you're talking about the greater percentage. Your greater percentage of farmers that are murdered, sadly, are white. But irrespective, farm murders need to stop. You state farmers need to more readily provide access to their lands to law enforcement officials. Private security companies operating in farming communities need to work more closely with the South African police services and at the same time ensure that arrests of suspects are done within the confines of our Constitution. We must continue to explore additional measures such as integrated communication technologies to step up rural safety. Mr. President, the time for your boardroom chats, putting together little meetings of all people that you want to make feel important and go and order Nando's to huge amounts of money so that they can caucus and talk and try and figure out what should be done, and then get another little one together to sit and caucus and talk whether it would be right. The time for talk is over. You are not even trying. You are pathetic by trying to palm off responsibility. Do you not think, do you not see, can you not hear that everything possible has been tried already? That it is now the responsibility of the government to protect the food baskets and the people who are making it possible, the people who are trying to make a living, the people who are making a living for the rest of South Africa. You and your government need to stop abdicating responsibility. You want them to give private security companies and SAPS more access and easier access. Let's take a look at that. Who do you trust these days? This is February this year. It's not years ago. Police members arrested for involvement in farm attack. I don't think it's the only one. We don't even know who to trust anymore. because the government's too busy counting their money, stealing, corrupting, feeding their faces, ignoring their country, the pleas of their people, creating division. Mr. President, your letter is pathetic. I'm sorry. As much as what you have tried to address a situation, you have made a mess. At the same time, we have to invest in rural development and tackle the severe inequality that persists in farming communities. We need a coordinated effort to improve the quality of life of all people living in rural areas if we are to eliminate poverty, which is a major contributing factor to crime. Now, Mr. President, if you enabled farmers, you would find higher employment rates. Farming communities are a tight community. Most communities and workers on the farm, laborers on the farm, care for the farmer. That's his friend. When he goes out to work every day, his workers are his friends. He is their workers' friends. They have a bond that they form because those are the people that work together. That is why farm workers also get killed, because of their loyalty. They're prepared to stand up and protect people that have actually cared for them, people that you are trying to incite, to change, to press against. And once again, it can be seen in your statement where you're stating rural development, tackle the severe inequality that persists in farming communities. We need to coordinate effort to improve the quality of life of the people living in rural areas if we are to eliminate poverty, which is a major contributing factor to crime. Just actually, and I don't know if it was there, but I just wanted to bring it to your attention because I think somewhere you said, somewhere it said that it is labor. And Becky Telly said the motive for farm attacks, Telly and his boys, there's also a pathetic excuse breathing around this area, stating he's disgusted by the violence, the violent protest, the actions. Really? But he has not once lifted a finger, raised a voice, and you, Mr. President, have not put a pen down either. The bunch of you, cronies. But you have the gall, Mr. Telly, to say how disgusted you are at the actions. But you placidly watch as the EFF tear this country apart. As the ANC incites division, racism. But let's take a look. Mr. Telly says the motive for farm attacks is often the mistreatment of workers. The answer, the minister doesn't read it. It seems government's own commission of inquiry into farm attacks concluded that only 1.6% of farm attacks are motivated by labor-related issues. But the ANC would never allow facts to stand in the way of their Boer blaming and scapegoating. Sadly, that is true. We'd be naive to assume that the race relations in farming communities have been harmonious since the advent of democracy. Once again, you are inciting division. Unless it is addressed in an open and honest manner, unless we are prepared to engage in dialogue, this will remain a festering wound that threatens social cohesion. It's almost as if you are trying to justify farm murders, Mr. President. What happened in Senegal shows just how easily the tinderbox of race hatred can be ignited. As a nation, we must resist any attempts to use crime on farms to mobilize communities along racial lines. The only person who's actually racially motivating this subject right now is you, Mr. President, because the tinderbox of emotions was against farm murders and not a color. You, however, are making it a color. And that is why I say your letter is a pathetic excuse of an attempt to waddle across the floor, because the world is watching all of a sudden. It's caused an eye. One murder is a murder too many. You're right. I'll agree with that. We stand in solidarity with all victims of crime, regardless of whether they live in cities or on farms, whether they are farmers or farm workers. Yes, I agree. You tend to put a true word in there too. We must work together to root out criminality, whether it is in Senegal. You're agreeing there. We need to root out criminality, whether it is in Senegal or in the streets of Delft. Crime is not somebody else's problem. It is our collective problem. Now, Mr. President, I want to tell you something. For the support of the absolute savage, brutal, torturous murder of a 21-year-old child who was hung up against a pole after being tortured and beaten to death, there was no support to show solidarity from you or the rest of the country who are divided. You had a farming community, farmers, and a community who stood behind them. However, when a criminal, a known criminal, died at the hands of a foreign police officer, agreed, in a foreign country, guess what our country did? We had protests. We had protests, EFF, in solidarity with George Floyd. They were protesting in South Africa for something that happened in the United States. There we go. Once again, a race-related issue comes up. But when it came to our own country, where you say we need to work together to root out criminality, whether it is in Senegal or in the streets of Delft, crime is not somebody else's problem. It is our collective problem. You are 100% right there. It is our collective problem. But we're going to have to start prioritizing. We're going to have to start implementing. You are going to have to prioritize. You are going to have to implement. And you are going to have to stop turning a blind eye. And you are going to have to stop trying to smooth over with daisy petals. We must remain vigilant and work with the police to keep our communities safe. That we should keep our police clean, because there are some really, really good police officials. It's sad that our force has been corrupted. We must not harbor criminals among us. Contradictory. We've got a government full of criminals, but anyway. In far too many instances, perpetrators are known to communities and are sheltered by them. We must not be blinded by our own prejudices. There, Mr. President, I'm going to say to take the plank out of your own eye before you point at the splinter of others. To the suffering and pain of others, it should not matter to us if the victim of violent crime is black or white. Now you're starting to get it. After you have divided and racially implied throughout your whole letter. You're right. This last sentence is right. To do so would be a betrayal not just of this country's founding principles, but of our own humanity. With regards, Cyril Ramaphosa. I'm not particularly impressed with that letter. Just from a layman's point of view, in guise, if you get hold of a Ronaldo House, or you can get hold of a Chris Wyatt, and you feel to ask a couple of deeper questions, these guys can delve deeper. I know that they've arrested a farmer for his for incitement to violence, and Julius Malema, who incites violence openly, has not been touched, reprimanded, spoken about, known as disgusted. And this news is already all over the front mainstream media. We've heard nothing about Brennan Horner's murderers, but this farmer is being hauled over the coals, and I don't really think he was, who am I to say, but you know what? If he was saying his say, he said it far more placidly than what many EFF and other protesters in this country have done, that our government has turned a blind eye to. And I think because of the fact of the country turning around and saying, we will take no more of this, you have suddenly jumped to your pen to try and write a soothing letter, which you did not succeed in, because I feel that you have created a lot of division. You have abdicated your responsibility. You have tried to throw in a few little tethering plasters by saying you were going to put together a forum or something to look into this. You have aggravated racism by deliberately stating black and white, manipulating that white and black have a division, and that the past, once again, dragging that wonderful little gravy train that you ride from the past into it as well. A few true sentences have adorned your letter. However, I do believe it is a pathetic excuse to wash your hands of a situation that is your responsibility, Mr. President. And I will leave it there. For the rest of you watching, as I said, Ronaldo House, Chris Wyatt, I will link them into the comments below, as well as the link to the President's letter if you would like to reread it or look at it again as well. Thanks again for taking a look at Pepper man in the street, just checking from the outside to the inside. Nothing more, nothing fancy, no overeducation. Take care, be good, and if you can't be good, at least be kind. Cheers.